It all began with a secret, one that stayed hidden for months, growing heavier and harder to keep with each passing day. A college student carried this secret like a weight on her shoulders, but no one could have imagined where it would lead. Then, in a moment of anger and fear, everything changed. The tragic story of a daughter and her mother is one of heartbreak and shocking violence. Her life was cut short in a way no one could have ever expected. It wasn't with a gun or a knife at first, but with something as ordinary as a frying pan, a tool meant for cooking, not harm. The same pan that might have once been used to make family meals became the weapon that started a chain of events too awful to imagine. What could push someone to such a terrible place? The questions still haunt everyone who hears this story. So let's dig into the details to find the answer. Sydney had been struggling in college for a while. Instead of opening up about her difficulties, she chose to hide them. She was afraid of disappointing her parents and didn't want to face their disappointment. For months, she kept up the illusion of a normal college student life. She attended classes, joined her sorority for events, and stayed in her dorm. But behind the scenes, everything was falling apart. By December of 2019, Sydney had flunked 3 of her 4 classes. Instead of confessing to her parents, she carried on the charade as if everything was perfectly all right. She avoided any real communication about academic troubles and seemed to find it easier to live in denial rather than face the truth of the matter. When she was officially expelled from school, she could no longer hide the reality. Instead of telling her parents what had happened, Sydney made a desperate decision. She would stay in hotels, trying to avoid confronting the truth. Every night she lay awake, consumed by guilt, wondering what would happen when her parents found out. Then, one day, her secret came crashing down. Sydney's father, Stephen, was attempting to pay her tuition online, but when he couldn't access the payment portal, he became suspicious. He confronted Sydney regarding that, and that was the end. Everything came crashing down then because Sydney was so afraid to keep up the lie that she couldn't do that anymore. She finally came clean with her father after months that she had gotten expelled from school. Then truth had come to light, and there was nothing to turn back. Stephen was shocked and worried. He immediately told Brenda, Sydney's mother, who worked as a child life specialist at Akron Children's Hospital. Brenda returned home that day determined to talk to Sydney, to understand why she had kept this secret for so long, and to help her face the consequences of her actions. She wasn't angry, at least not initially, but wanted to understand what had led Sydney down that path. While she was on the phone with officials from Sydney's school, trying to figure out what could be done, something strange and unsettling happened. On the other end of the phone call, school officials heard a series of loud bangs, followed by screams, and then silence. The call abruptly disconnected. Concerned, one of the officials called back. But when Sydney answered the phone, she tried to impersonate her mother. Something about the way she spoke didn't feel right. It was odd, almost as if she was pretending to be someone she wasn't. The official, sensing that something was terribly wrong, immediately contacted the police, urging them to go to the house. By then, it was clear that something had gone terribly wrong. When the police arrived, they found a confusing yet tragic scene. Sydney said an intruder had broken into the house and that her mother had told her to run. When she went back, she found Brenda lying on the floor. But as police questioned her further, her story started to fall apart. Details didn't add up. The truth, as prosecutors would later reveal, was far more disturbing. In a sudden and violent outburst, Sydney had attacked her mother. Sydney Powell hit her mother, Brenda Powell, 50, with a cast iron skillet before stabbing her nearly 30 times in the neck. First, she grabbed a cast iron skillet and hit Brenda repeatedly. Then, in a chilling escalation, she went to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and stabbed her mother multiple times. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment fit of rage. Prosecutors argued that this was a deliberate act, carried out by Sydney to keep her secret from being exposed. Her mother was the one person who could have found out everything, and in that moment, Sydney couldn't bear to let that happen. 3 defense experts, all clinical psychologists, assessed Sydney and diagnosed her with schizophrenia. They testified that she was in the midst of a psychotic episode when the crime occurred. These assessments painted a tragic picture of a young woman struggling with mental illness, isolated from those who could have helped her. The prosecution side of the story, however, was very different. A clinical psychologist, hired by the prosecution, admitted that Sydney suffered from mental illness, but believed strongly she was not in the psychotic break during the killing. This expert testified that whereas Sydney may have had a disease, she knew of the consequences of her conduct and knew what she did at the time of this attack. This was not an uncontrollable psychotic episode, but an action of violence, according to the prosecution. Sydney's father, Stephen, as well as her grandmother, Betsy, testified to her defense. This moment was incredibly emotional. These people did not want Sydney locked away forever. She was loved and believed needed help, not punishment. The agony of losing Brenda was unbearable, but they still desired to have their daughter obtain treatment. But the prosecutors didn't believe it. The prosecutors argued that Sydney knew what she was doing, and she had deliberately done it at that very moment. The trial became hectic for everyone involved. Then, when the verdict of the jury finally reached the courtroom, it meant Sydney's life would never be the same again. She broke down in tears when the verdict was read, and the reality of her actions hit her all at once. She was taken into custody, and as she was led away, the courtroom was heavy with grief, guilt, and sorrow. Sydney was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. The court decided that, although mental health was involved in the crime, she was guilty of her actions. After weighing both defense claims about a psychotic break and the prosecution's claim that Sydney knew right from wrong, the judge has ruled that Sydney will be spending potentially decades in prison, paroled later based on good behavior and rehabilitation. This is a story of full questions. Might things have been different had Sydney called for help early? Perhaps this tragedy might have been avoided if only her family knew just how bad things had become. It's a very difficult and painful thought to live with that there were moments, that there were times when it could have turned around, but now is too late to turn it back. This tragic outcome reminds us of the dangers of keeping secrets, letting shame and fear take control until something catastrophic happens. It also reminds us of how much we need to pay attention to the people around us. Be there for those who might be silently struggling before it's too late. As Sydney is serving her sentence, her family is left to face the heart-wrenching truth that their lives have been shattered in ways they could never have imagined. She will have to live with the truth of what she did, and her family will have to learn how to go on without the woman they loved. It is a story of grief, love, mental health, and violence. And it's a reminder that sometimes things can go terribly wrong when we least expect it. That all from our side. Now we want to hear from you. What could have been done to prevent a tragedy like this? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story gripped you, don't forget to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe for more true crime stories that dig deep into the moments that change lives forever. Hit that bell icon so you never miss an update. See you in the next one.